Hi, my name is Eran Dror from Remake Labs, and today I want to invite you to our Design Sprint webinar. I want to just tell you about the webinar a little bit. It's happening again now. It's a global webinar. It's going to happen on April 16th. And I wanted to show you a little bit of what we have in store and tell you a little bit about design sprints and why I think you should learn it as a methodology, especially during this time. So first of all, what's a design sprint, right? So some of you may have heard the term, some of you know a little bit about it. We define a design sprint as a 5-day process which allows 3 to 10 people to solve large problems and test new products. This is based on a book that I'm going to be talking about in a minute, not my book, but a book by Jake Knapp. So basically, what's the idea of a design sprint? The idea is you go from an idea of a problem and kind of an idea for a project to a prototype and a full user validation session at the end in just 5 days. So essentially, this is what it looks like. Normally, we're all kind of in the same room. We use sticky notes, we use sketches, we use whiteboards. And this is what it looks like in the online age. So we use something like Zoom and a tool like Miro, which is an infinite whiteboard kind of tool, fully collaborative, where you can also use sticky notes, you can post sketches, and we're making some adaptations to the process based on case studies and kind of our experience to make it flow even remotely. So a design sprint started at Google with Jake Knapp, this guy, who was a product designer at Gmail and the first designer at Google Hangouts. And he tells the story of flying to Stockholm to work with the technical team there on Google Hangouts, the very first version of Google Hangouts. And because he cleared up his entire week, he came in from San Francisco, so his whole week was dedicated just to this one project. And because he was coming from San Francisco, the local team also kind of cleared up their schedule and spent the whole week with him. And at the end of the week, the first version of Google Hangouts was born, and people inside of Google already started using it, and it started going up from there. And so the question that Jake asked at the time was, how can I make every week as effective as this week? Because this has clearly been the best, most effective week in my life in terms of output and outcomes. And so he started putting together exercises from the world of design and design thinking and UX design and product design, all together in this kind of 1 week long package, based on the idea that people are going to be clearing a whole week and just dedicating themselves to this one thing, and also that they'll be sitting in the same room together. And he ran this sprint and kept adapting it over, I think, 100 projects at Google. Pretty much every product that you can imagine at Google, from ads, Chrome, search, Android, they all had design sprints run. And then he was brought into Google Ventures, Google's investing arm, and basically started running design sprints there with the portfolio companies of Google Ventures, with the startups. And there's many famous stories. Some of them are in the book. Startups like Medium, startups like Blue Bottle Coffee even, and many others, Savioke, the robotics company. And essentially they kept adapting it to really achieve kind of the best results, both from a design perspective, from a de-risking perspective, where you validate with users at the end, and also kind of really focusing the sprint around asking the right questions. So what's my goal, and what are the 3 key things that I need to test during the validation session at the end? It's a whole day of validation with users, and how to do it. The book was published in 2016. This is the book right here. It's a gorgeous book. I really highly recommend it. It has, it kind of has a lot of to-dos and templates and sketches for the different exercises. It's divided by days. So I think from then on, it sort of caught on, right? And so here are some of the companies that either routinely or occasionally run design sprints, includes a lot of famous names. It's interesting to note not only software companies like Google, Slack, and Airbnb and Netflix, but also a company like Lego that's now doing design sprints for every new product. They actually implemented the design sprint across the board. So this is interesting. It kind of shows you that it's not just for physical, it's not just for software, digital products, it's also for physical products and many different kinds. There's also one medical and an actual medical clinic that was actually redesigning its space and its service. So I think it's sort of really catching on these days, and you can see even some of the biggest names in consulting, including IDEO, which is a legendary design company that designed the first Mac with Apple. All of them are kind of looking at the sprint and saying, "Wow, this really makes a lot of sense," and are getting phenomenal results from it. So I just want to give you a few kind of key features of the sprint, and I'm going to invite you to join our webinar on April 16th, and you can learn more there. And it's a very experiential approach, so you get to actually try the different exercises, and at the end of it, I really hope that you'll understand the sprint much better. You'll be able to start picturing, where does this fit in my process? And people usually kind of feel that way at the end. So some cool features for the sprint. It's really established and well respected. That really helps when you're working with either a tough client or a tough manager who's kind of really set in their ways. If you're asking them to let go of control for 5 days, it helps that it's being run by some of the biggest brands in the world. It's a short dedicated time, which is great. You can put it on your calendar. You can know on what date am I going to have a prototype with feedback on the prototype. So it makes things a lot more predictable. It requires a discovery mindset. What do I mean by that? What I mean is you can get fairly locked in to your opinions and the way you see the world and the way kind of your favorite solution. And the sprint really kind of makes you take a step back, because the first day you're mostly listening to other people talking about how they see the problem through the user and expert interviews. Then you're kind of seeing everybody's ideas as they sketch them. You get to hear many different variations on what should be our long-term goal, etc. And so it really opens you up in a way that I've not seen many processes do. And that results in much better decisions. So you're much less locked in and much more likely to slightly change your mind based on feedback. It's time boxed, so you might have seen the timer we have here. Time boxing really makes us focus and not get into a perfectionistic mindset. We just have to keep going, and so we're always in this tunnel of time. Almost every minute in the sprint, you're supposed to be doing something, and you're inside one of these time boxes, maybe 45 minutes of sketching, or 20 minutes of thinking about the long-term goal. And it's a really unique experience to actually be able to focus on just one thing for a whole week. Most people who experience a sprint really feel like they come back at the end. They're coming back into daily reality, and it's like, wow, I can't believe we've been in this almost like alternative reality because of this time boxing. Highly recommend to kind of experience that. It includes all the research, inspiration, validation exercises. So one of the things that Jake says is, like, he was really inspired by Atul Gawande's book, The Checklist, which is about how surgeons can save lives by having all the right, by using a checklist, essentially, by not trusting their instincts and their experience, but having a checklist for everything that needs to be done pre-surgery, let's say. And so Jake kind of created this to make sure that we don't skip steps, because as product designers and product people, we know that there's always a lot of pressure to skip steps that maybe someone doesn't like. So skipping interviews with experts because we know enough, or skipping validation. So this really is a package where in 1 week you can not skip any essential steps. Clearly, you could do a lot more of every step. You can also do months of research, but at the very least, you're going to do some. And that's really, really important, especially for startups who need to move very quickly. It's 100% focused attention. That's really, really important because it allows for better ideas. It allows for a deeper understanding of the problem when you're not answering emails and texts and checking Facebook. So essentially, we have one rule during the sprint, which is if you need to check your email, if you need to use your phone or computer and do something that's not related to the sprint, just leave the sprint room, do what you got to do, and come back. Because really, every minute of the sprint, you're supposed to be doing something. So if you're not doing it, at least don't pretend to be doing it and step out of the room. Another principle is we work separately first and then come together. So it's together alone. A lot of the time, this is a sprint we did in the US. A lot of the times, you first work out your own ideas on paper or in your tool, before you show it to others and before there's any discussion. And the reason is mathematically, I can kind of explain it. It's very simple. If you let 3 people talk, you usually end up with one idea at the end, right? Because they talk it out and you narrow it down and you end up with one idea. Did the other ideas get full exploration, full kind of airtime? Probably not. But if you let each person develop their own idea, and you have 3 people, at the end you're going to have 3 fleshed out, well thought out ideas, and then you have a much better time of saying, oh, this works here and this works here, and maybe we can find ways to combine them, or just having a better discussion of what's the approach that we want to take. And it's not just based on who's the most dominant voice, etc. And so another aspect of this is we always bring something tangible to the table, right? So how many times have we had this experience of arguing with someone for like 2 hours and then someone comes in and draws something and both parties immediately agree, right? So what was the argument about? It was about misunderstanding, miscommunication, imagining different things, and just blah, blah, talking words at each other instead of showing something tangible and concrete. So that's another way we save a ton of time by just always bringing something to the table, to the discussion before we discuss it. And of course, I mentioned before with the time boxing, bias towards action. Whenever there's a 20-minute period to make a decision, at the end of that 20-minute period, the decision is made because we have to move on to the next exercise, and it depends on having a decision. And it really puts us in a less perfectionistic, less anxious mindset, more experiential. It's very much in line with kind of design thinking principles of creativity requires movement over perfection, progress over perfection. And their requirements are really simple. So in a normal sprint, physical sprint, you need some sticky notes, you need some Sharpies, you need like a time timer. I always say the hardest thing to actually get, the hardest requirement to secure is a room where you're not going to be interrupted for 5 days. So if you can get that, essentially everything else is super, super simple. And so now I want to invite you to our webinar on April 16th. But before we begin, I just want to kind of talk to you about the technology a little bit. So we're using Crowdcast. It's a really fun, really engaging webinar tool. You don't need to download anything. So if you sign up, we're just going to send you a link to Crowdcast, and that link is going to work. And you're going to have chat on the right side. You're going to have the ability to ask questions and vote on them. And essentially, you're going to see me and my guests in the video port, but you're not going to have to get on the air unless you want to volunteer for something, for an exercise. So you can really watch it with your kids. You can watch it in your pajamas. Unless you volunteer to go up in the air, nobody's going to see or hear you. It's just about chat. And it's still very interactive. So this is where, me and my volunteers are going to be. This is where the chat happens. They're just typing in chat. This is where you ask questions. Hopefully, I'd love to see you. And I hope you can join us for a pretty exciting global webinar. We almost have already 200 people signed up. I expect this to go much higher before. And it's going to be very exciting to solve a problem together, experience the sprint together, really understand how it can fit in our process and in our businesses, and especially during this time where a lot of us at home are sitting at home. Maybe we can't really do our full-time job, but we can definitely come up with a new project. We can definitely accomplish, if we could imagine if you could use a couple of weeks of isolation at home as a way to launch a couple of prototypes and test them using remote tools. So it's really incredible. It's an incredible opportunity right now, and I think I'd love to see you join us. So just follow the instructions below, and hopefully I'll see you soon.